Digitel is one of the leading companies helping associations leverage their content through event live streaming, webinars, and knowledge distribution. Take advantage of their 32 years of streaming success in generating revenue for their clients than any other company, hands down. For more information on Digitel, go to digitelinc.com.
Are you
10, 9, 8,
okay,
7,
so we're gonna
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Executive Editor Beth Kormanik.
Today we're speaking with Audrey Gallien and Brandt Krueger. Those are names that are familiar to our GatherGeeks listeners. They are our former GatherGeeks hosts, and they're going to continue to check in with us throughout the year. They are event practitioners who can compare notes with us, further the conversation about what's happening in the field. Here we're going to cover a lot of hot topics, which event tech we think is here to stay, smart partnerships between events and brands, and authenticity in events in the age of Donald Trump. We're calling it the Crystal Ball episode. We're going to look into the future and take a listen.
Okay, guys. We got the band back together, and we want to make this episode our crystal ball episode. Ooh. We want to know what people are thinking from this great brain trust we have here about the future of events. So why don't we start with just picking a topic, and we'll do round robin. What's going on with presentations and speeches at events? Who wants to take the lead on that?
David, I think that we are we're kind of in a new era with presentations and speeches in that people want to share the content as widely as possible. So you're seeing experiments with live stream like we've never seen before, in which you really want to engage people, and you're able to do that in such a wide variety of means. But the thing is, what you have to, when you realize that you're sharing with people all across the world, you kind of have to up your game, right? You can't do the same old. So everything from making sure your speakers are more polished, really diving into things. Nobody has time to waste at these events. Your speaker doesn't need to give their bio. They just need to get into the content. So coaching your speakers and really thinking about maybe some of the things that might have been considered superficial as before. Like, we heard from our friends at Engage, in which they talked about providing hair and makeup for their speakers. Well, that's important if you're going to be streaming. And how's your light? Are people looking like, they've got shadows on their face? No, you want them to look the best they can. So think about your light and challenge your speakers to be more engaging, whether that's through, polls that you're doing on your phone, or, having questions popping in for them from attendees that are really all over the world now. So I think it's thinking about not only the room you're in, but all of the screens you're on.
So Audrey, you have a big event coming up yourself. How are you sort of coaching your speakers, and how are your presentations changing from years before?
Yeah, it's changing a lot. I was thinking, while you were talking, Beth, it's about shorter and faster, but also, we're not seeing a standard formal keynote anymore. It's always collaborative driven, as if you as an attendee are having a conversation. So if you have some kind of interactive poll feature, if you're stopping and having even just your attendee talk to your neighbor for 5 minutes and come back, you can achieve an amazing keynote that's interactive in a 30-minute chunk. And what it's all about when we're doing a big annual event like the one that my organization is putting on, I was telling David, we have 75 speakers. And that's, for a 700 person audience, that's a lot. But it's these small sound bites and turning it into a collaborative conversation over and over and over again.
Are these 75 people, are they scripted now? Or what's your format?
We got a lot of panels, but shorter panels. We have a lot of different pieces of moments where we'll take our attendees back into the grand ballroom and do interactive workshops. But the workshop is only going to be 30 minutes at a time. So we'll have people up on stage, in the audience, moving around.
So physical, we talked a lot about physical is important now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The podium is not working anymore.
Really? Down with the podium?
Much. I mean, I personally love a podium, but I think it's making that connection with the audience to make them feel like they are there with you, part of the conversation and creating something.
So, Brandt, what are you seeing? You're everywhere. You are like on the circuit.
It feels like we're, for the better part of the last year or so, the pendulum's been swinging toward the TED-style talks. And I think we're starting to realize that doesn't work for everything. And there's that downward pressure of shorter sessions, fast-paced kind of stuff, that works for keynotes and things like that, but maybe not necessarily so much in the breakouts, that we need to be able to give things their own space and be able to dedicate the time necessary. I just got back from an event in Dublin, EventX, where we were doing all-day masterclasses, and that was so nice to be able to go into a topic, deep dive all day long, and then really come out of it like you were learning something, as opposed to some of the downward pressure that we've been seeing of like half hour only. So that's what I'm finding really encouraging about presentations coming up kind of in this next year.
So that means that there's a lot more pressure on the presenter. I mean, if you're doing an all-day masterclass, you better know your stuff.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And be prepared to fill that space. I'll be honest with you. I ran into some problem that we had significantly less people show up for my session than were planned. And a lot of what I do is take audience what they want to talk about. So with fewer people, we had less topics to discuss. So it was a little bit harder to fill that all-day slot.
And what about when you have less people attending? That's the biggest fear of a presenter is you go out and look at the audience and like half the people are not there, right? Is that the fear that most presenters have?
You make lemonade, right? So what we did is we all sat down around the same table, and it became much more of a conversation where we're able to just sit down and say, okay, now, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? Okay, great. And we kind of, moved from topic to topic and that kind of thing, rather than me just standing up in the front of a room. It became much more of a workshop, much more of a conversation. So being able to, on the fly, kind of take it to that next level, I think is an important ability in a speaker.
So related to that is another hot topic I'd like us to talk about, which is conference room design, the space where you're meeting. I still think content is still the most important thing. You have to have something to say and you have to be able to get it across. But the space itself is changing. And I'm not just talking about hip millennial approved conference spaces. Even in the most traditional of hotels, they are thinking about space differently. And it's so interesting because a year ago, we wrote a story on new ways to design business events. That story is still going strong. So that tells me that everybody's thinking about ways in which people are gathering, like the physical ways. So whether it's ditching the classroom style setup or the theater style setup and having couches in the front or soft seating, to maybe if you do have a more traditional theater style setup, having the laptop lane in the back where people can set up and still be connected. But I think that people are getting more creative and realizing that, you don't always want to be in something that looks like a boring ballroom.
Well, I think the neuroscience of all that speaks to that. We've talked about that many times, that just the idea of creating different ways for people's brain to work in a temporary situation will change how they relate to the person sitting next to them. If you're sitting next to them in a chair facing the front, I don't even talk to the person next to me. I want to avoid eye contact for the most part. So you just want to make it friendlier. It sounds like a blinding glimpse of the obvious to some people, but I just spoke at an event for PCMA this week, and the risk of changing a room between senior management and the event organizers is monumental. When everyone says, yes, I want to change, I want to do everything. But then when it comes down to it, just changing a table from a round table to a square table is a big deal, right?
Yes.
Audrey, do you have those kind of fights?
From a corporate event planner perspective, absolutely. And I think, thinking about it at large, we've seen, we're now able to crowdsource so much better. We know that all of our attendees experience and absorb information, back to the neuroscience, differently. So if we're able to create space that works differently for every kind of subgroup of attendees, I think that's amazing. But, at the same time, you also have traditional, senior level executives that want it the way that it's been, because, of course, that's how they learn and that's the environment that they're in. But it's incredible how challenging it is to get buy-in to actually approve going from, a round table to a crescent or a rectangle. I mean, it's crazy.
I think it's a great time to be in the rental business because you can really show off everything that you're doing and the creativity that you have and saying, look, well, we have these options for you. Whether that's used during a breakout or as your main, plenary session area. So there's a lot of room for creativity. Content is still important, but the environment that you're learning it in is changing.
But it's also more than just the shape of the room. It's the senses that you're activating in the room too. Like using music in AV and how the dynamic of the hallway is working and things like that, which change everything as well. I would assume, Brandt, you have some opinions on all of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the multiple setups within the one room, where you can appeal to the different types of learners and the different types of folks, and you don't have to go crazy with them, so you have some, you can inch your way into this thing for the more conservative groups. You start with your theater seating or your classroom seating, and then maybe just on the ends. And I think you even talked about this in one of your recent podcasts. Just throw some of those cocktail tables, those high boy cocktail tables, around the perimeter for people that want to stand up for a little while. That's me. I can't stand sitting in chairs all day. I need to stand up and move around and lean on a table, and then like you said, Beth, have laptop row in the back. Have dedicated power sources in the back so if people need to charge. So you don't have to go all in all at once and have hundreds of different kinds of seating. You can keep your more traditional stuff down the middle, and then around the perimeter start to experiment. And then if that winds up being popular, then you can go to your higher ups and say, look, everybody was hanging out in the back, by the laptop power. Maybe we need to have a row at the front with laptop power, or everyone was at the cocktail tables, or everyone was on the couches. So you can start to use that to influence those that might be a little resistant.
However, I think you have to understand the purpose of the event, of the meeting. And you have to be strategic about the social physics, how the ideas flow at this meeting.
Absolutely.
If it's an ideation thing, it's a different setup than an informational event. So it's up to the event organizer to understand strategically what is trying to be accomplished in an event, rather than it's just a bunch of the people in the AV department or in the staging department setting it up and you give no input.
At the same time, there are still a lot of practical concerns. We'll give the C-suite some credit. Sometimes they go into these new spaces and they're scared by a glass wall. It's somebody's going to be finding out our proprietary stuff that we're talking about, and so you do have to balance, whether that's a legitimate concern or not.
Should we go into the next topic?
Let's do.
Let's choose AR, VR. There's a lot of controversy over this.
For the uninitiated, that's augmented reality and virtual reality. Some of the most fun tools I think that we're seeing these days.
I think we should start with Brandt on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy to. But David, I'm curious because you said there's a lot of controversy around that. So I'm just curious what you mean by that.
Everyone says that VR is the future. And then every time I talk to someone, it's such a personal experience. You don't really have the group involved with it. So you're looking kind of more inward as opposed to outward. When you go to, not that I go to electronic dance music festivals and things like that, but there is a whole sense that
I would love to see that.
I don't know if maybe Audrey, you have to take me to one, but I'm assuming that it's sort of the action is around everyone as opposed to individual. Yes, VR is perfect for certain things,
right?
But right now it's the shiny object in front of everybody.
It is, but it's not being done exclusively at those type of events, David. You know, we saw one of New York's splashiest galas, the Amphar Gala, recently, and they had virtual reality installations there. That's a crowd of celebrities and fashion people, and they want to get their hands in it too. So,
but are we at a point where we're just experimenting with it? It's kind of like the old days of using like an app to let you enter the room. That it's kind of like the new thing that we're trying, or is it something that's really happening?
It's been around, I think, long enough. It is definitely the shiny new toy. But I think people are adapting in the way they use it. And instead of instead of you look over in the corner and there's somebody with a headset on, you have no idea what's happening. We're seeing activations around it. So the space actually, there's something for people who aren't experiencing it to look at.
Right.
But you're talking the attendee experience. I think from a planning perspective, it's going to be unbelievable in terms of using the tools so you can envision a whole experience of a room or something before you even get to from a planning tool. It's going to be incredible.
Exactly. So and that's where I wanted to kind of go with it. So David, the fear that you expressed is exactly the fear that a lot of people are like, well, how does this thing that I put on my head and go into this virtual world, how is that a group experience, right? that's what we're, event people are people, right? We think about group experiences and attendee experiences. VR is great as a side attraction on your event, right? Just like we've had all kinds of golf simulators and vodka luges and all that little thing that you go to on the side of your event. There's no question about that, and that will continue to grow. But it can actually be a group experience. So in addition to building something around it, an activation around a VR experience, I am seeing creative event planners starting to use the power of VR as a group experience. So
how do they do that?
There was There was one that Audi and Samsung teamed up together to put 100 VR headsets that were linked simultaneously in a room. So everybody walks in, everybody sits down, they put on a headset, they all experience the same animation all running at once. They're all able to individually look around within that animation. So they show the car, they show the interior, they show all the interesting, they go on a fantastic ride. But what's funny is to watch the people wearing the headsets in some of the promotional videos. They're holding hands, they're laughing, they're giggling at they're talking to each other. And then when they were done with the experience, they all took off the goggles and the car was there. They had taken down the fourth wall. And then so it's part of the experience. So it is possible to have a group experience in VR, even though you're in your own little world. Now, and then just recently, I was talking to, this was over a year ago that they were doing this, and already Samsung teamed up with a company in Poland to do 1,000 connected headsets at once, all watching and experiencing the same thing simultaneously, which is crazy. Yeah. Now, that being said, and I know we don't have time to go into these things too in depth, but I do agree that where the biggest potential is on the back end, using these as tools for planners, being able to go on virtual site visits. For a technical director to be able to see the ballroom and then layer over, here's where all the outlets are, here's where the power is, here's where the rigging points are. So the back end, I was just talking about this with someone the other day, the business opportunities that might be in VR and AR. And so this ability to build up the back end and use these as powerful tools for planners to be able to throw a headset on your client and say, look, this is what your event is going to look like. And to have that person be able to move around three-dimensionally in that space, see the sight lines so that you know what the person in the back of the room is going to be able to see. That is an incredibly powerful technology that is not that far off.
How about augmented reality? What's the future of that for our industry?
That's more integrated.
So just to be clear, yeah. So just to be clear for anybody that might be confused, virtual reality is the whole headset that you put on and you go into your own little world. Augmented reality is layering information over reality, so you can still see the room. So I kind of see VR as being like the site inspection, like the pre-site inspection. AR, you walk into the hotel or the venue and you put on the pair of AR goggles. You're in a big empty ballroom, but now you can layer over what it's going to look like with 1,000 rounds in it, what it's going to look like in classroom setup, in Chevron setup. Oh, by the way, here's what it's going to look like with a stage set. And that's layered over the empty ballroom. And again, the technical side is obviously for me is where I get giddy. You start to see, okay, here's where all the outlets are. Here's where the power is layered over reality. And that's where I think, again, the back end stuff is going to be exciting.
So what about at the guest experience? Do you see, I see AR as the new name tag. You don't even have to have name tags. You can just sort of know everything, everything about that person when you walk by them, because it's going to show up on your little eyeglass thing.
That's very Justin.
Anybody that's ever met me, the first words out of my mouth is, I have a terrible memory for names. So anybody who's met me in the last 5 years has heard me say that. So I can't wait to be able to, oh yeah, this is the person that I met 5 years ago at that one conference, and they're that little hover that hovers in a bubble over their head.
That's daunting. It raises so many questions about adoption and buy-in.
Oh, yeah.
And
Like, what is the introvert is going to go crazy, or the extrovert at an event? Like, oh my God, they see me. It's
got to be opt-in. I mean, we have tools to deal with this already, though. I mean, I think it's easy to get swept up in the dangers of it. But I mean, just like in the event app now, I can't get your contact information unless you say yes. So or we connect on LinkedIn or something along those lines. I would be opposed to it just mining information off the internet and going, oh yeah, this is so you can pretend like you know the person when you don't.
Right, exactly. We're looking into the crystal ball. This one may be a little bit further out in the future,
to think about it. It's fun,
for sure.
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
not that far.
One of the things that connected to this a little bit is some of my friends at Event Farm, Ryan there at Costello, calls this thing calls sort of the connection between IoT and registration a digital wonderland, which does kind of do this thing where you connect the registration to any activations and to the VRs and the ARs of the world, so that it's all this, what you're talking about, connectivity, not just an audience, but in general for an event organizer that connects everything from the beginning of the experience to the end. Is that anything that's happening in reality, or is that just pie in the sky right now?
I think it's happening. Yeah, I think that's a very realistic thing to happen.
Connecting the dots is the next sort of thing,
kind of
the next
standard,
logical thing.
Yeah. And, to your point about an extrovert and an introvert, I mean, for an introvert, this is a dream come true. They have the information that they need. It's always the fear of what that first starting point is going to be for your conversation. And now you have that information in front of you. So I think that's great.
And the best events have always connected the dots, right? You know, they're not just throwing the technology at it and saying, boy, this is shiny, let's use it. They always have a purpose. They have a reason. And so, making that digital wonderland so that all of those things are connected from start to finish and have a purpose is, whether it's technology or food or anything, right? Well, always connecting those dots.
The one other area that Jill Drury talks about when she's doing a lot of work for IBM, and they're trying to create how to do a cognitive event, which brings us kind of to what is AI going to do to our industry. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's like mind-boggling, the kinds of things that can happen. Brandt, do you have any experience in that area?
Man, it's getting in everything, right? I mean, it was the buzzword already last year, and it is already this year. So using those engagements, those it's still in its infancy. I mean, we went from 5 years ago to AI being some future Skynet thing to like literally it's doing amazing things with voice recognition and voice interpretation, and I have my Google Home sitting here on my desk, and I love it. It's just in its infancy, and it's hard to believe or hard to know exactly how much of an impact it's going to have on every industry, much less ours.
Well, from our industry, I think one of the core things is seating. Imagine being able to use AI to seat the perfect people next to the perfect person about the interests and things that they want without being sort of, it's all haphazard. It's kind of the way it's done now. And how you can then go in and find etiquette rules about how you deal with certain things from different cultures and putting them together on the fly. That takes a lot less stress in terms of researching and finding these things out. And the Facebooks of that you create at an event of who the people are. You're going to see a lot of that, I believe. And that's kind of be the future.
Yeah, and all of that is very double-edged sword stuff too. I mean,
Absolutely.
if ever there was a manifestation of with great power comes great responsibility, it would definitely AI and the type of stuff we're talking about with augmented and virtual reality. All of that is going to have a very close eye on it from all of us to make sure that we're not going over any lines we shouldn't be going over.
Do you want to go into AV first? Does that sort of make sense?
I had another IBM.
Oh, go do an IBM. Okay, yeah. Beth, go.
So you mentioned David IBM, and we recently wrote about an event that took place in San Francisco, where Watson, the creation, I don't know if they're still calling it a supercomputer, but it is an AI tool from IBM, and they used it at a morning dance party. So it was they called it a cognitive dance party. And so Watson analyzed attendees' Twitter profiles before the event and then kind of sorted them into 3 different groups. And so that determined what color you were going to wear at the event and what playlist of songs you received before the event. and that, even design breakfast menus that would kind of go along with kind of your personality. And so you can do it in these fun ways too for consumer facing events. And it's kind of, the possibilities are endless. And they had a dance floor at the event that was kind of, they said, powered by tweets. And so there are, all sorts of interesting ways that you can integrate this into your events.
It's so interesting, these new things that are happening. Audrey, are you seeing these kinds of things taking hold in your world?
I mean, I would say, I don't, with AI, it mostly just scares me because I go like deep into robots taking over the world because I'm a sci-fi geek. But, with virtual reality in particular, we do have interaction. A buddy of mine he bought all of the gadgets for VR. He has a chest vest that vibrates and he's completely immersed. And he actually plays a game where you fly with other people. And he's connected with people all around the world, literally flying in Paris and talking to them. And so if you think about the massive events that are going on, if you want to create a global event in 3, 4, 5 different countries at one time, you can use VR to connect these attendees together. And that's not far away from happening. So I think, we shouldn't be afraid of VR being an isolated experience because it's going to be able to make us connect with each other from, hundreds of thousands of miles away.
So you got to really think VR in the broadest possible.
Exactly.
I mean, the gaming world is there already, right?
Yeah. Oh, they're ready. Yeah. I went to a dance party in a VR space, and I was literally immersed in dancing with these people and these robots, and it was
wearing your
crazy.
VR set.
Wearing my VR set.
So you don't need any decor anymore. You just need to give everybody a whole VR experience. You can have a blank white room.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was in my pajamas. So anyways, I'm a big fan.
That's fantastic.
Maybe that's a good segue to talk about partnerships.
Yeah.
We are seeing people come together from all sorts of fields. An example that comes to mind immediately is a product launch I recently went to for Teddygrams. That's the snack we all remember from childhood, right?
Yes.
But they did a partnership with TED. So first you have the name that makes sense immediately, TED and Teddygrams. But they had the creative director of TED interviewing some PhDs as well as a celebrity mom, Vanessa Lachey, and they were just talking about the power of play. So here you have a product launch aimed at mommy bloggers, parent bloggers, and it has this learning component. You have PhDs at essentially a kid's snack lunch. And it was really fascinating and took an event to a different level, and they had it at an appropriate venue, the Children's Museum of the Arts here in Manhattan, and themed the catering, things that made sense for a kid audience, and it was surprising. It's thinking outside the box. It's coming up with a partnership that makes sense and gives attendees a little more than what they bargained for.
But you actually are saying something really interesting in that. If you looked at this partnership 10 years ago, they would never be caught dead in the same room.
Perhaps not.
And now all the rules are out the window. And so people are trying new things. And also it's about the shared equities of the brands, right?
Yeah,
are you
absolutely.
doing that?
100%. And I think because our business at large is changing, right? The way we're in a frictionless economy for the most part, you have Tesla, which makes cars, but they're actually mostly a web-based organization that can, they have so much more mobility. That changes the way that we interact from a B2B perspective. And so what I've seen even over the past 5 years is that organizations, companies, nonprofits we used to be very, very scared of partnerships. Very, very tight, very, they don't align exactly with what we're doing, so let's not get next to them. But it feels like it's just turning into kind of a free play where you can just take a step forward, use the product, their brand to accelerate and get your organization to that next level, and just kind of piggyback off each other.
But the brands have to be, it's really about the brand partnerships and the equity in the brand partnerships that they don't have a risk in. It's not like an individual that's going to do something crazy and destroy the equity of that.
Well,
partnership.
sure. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly boundaries still at hand, but I would say, I think Beth's example is great. I mean, you look at these two organizations next to each other and it's like, what is the shared purpose? Well, I think what we're doing is getting back to core mission of our economy and core mission of organizations. They're leading with that as opposed to what the return is for them. And so if you're staying there, you can tell any story you want to anyone virtually, right? So I think that the door for partnerships has opened up so much.
Well, the flip side the other side of that is not just the content side, but the practical aspect of the budget sharing side of that.
Yes.
That a lot of people, I think that a lot of people are finding strength in joining together, stronger together. We have heard before.
Yep.
And we've seen that when de Blasio came in 2000, when he was elected a few years ago, all these nonprofits got together to create one big sort of facility so people can sort of give the new administration their thoughts. And they banded together and they created this temporary workspace down in near Soho. And they were able to combine all their budgets for a much bigger impact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you still have to think about things like, are we sharing the same values?
Yes, it has to mix, it has to work.
Right, it has to make sense. You don't want to have something that's too much of a head scratcher that confuses and turns people off. So, planners are still thinking about these partnerships that make sense. But when it works, and there are a lot of benefits.
It has to be an active partnership between the two. I think some of the dangers and some of the times where we've seen these partnerships go south is when it tends to be the partnership where, okay, we just want to get in on what you guys are doing, so we're going to give you a bunch of money or you're going to give us a bunch of money and we'll make it happen. So I guess I would say be open to partnerships that you might not have considered in the past, but you do still need to be active participants in the discussion and make sure and monitor that things go forward, as I think Disney and the Disney PewDiePie thing that just recently happened would be able to say, make sure if you're going to tie your name to something that you are, have a modicum of control over how it's going to play out.
Can you explain that to people that may not be as knowledgeable as I am about PewDiePie?
Yeah, sure. I'm always hesitant to sound like, well, for those of you that might not know what the YouTubers are doing these days. So PewDiePie was the blow up YouTube sensation of the last several years, right? Making literally millions of dollars doing these little YouTube videos, and kids watch it. Well, he started trying to make a quote-unquote political statement that a lot of people felt was anti-Semitic. And he made several of these videos, like it was a bunch of them before anybody really noticed, and it got pointed out. And Disney had hitched their wagon, and I think someone else, I don't want to be wrong about it, but there was a couple of corporate sponsors that had hitched their wagon to this guy because he was so popular. And now all of a sudden they're having to walk back and be like, no, actually, no, we don't want to have anything to do with the potentially anti-Semitic YouTuber. It's definitely something that, that I think that is an example where, it wasn't an active partnership. They weren't working together on these videos in any way, shape, or form. It was just him doing whatever he wanted to do. So, and I've personally been in the position where I've, lent my name and been part of something that didn't turn out quite the way that I wanted to turn out because I didn't have very much control over what was going on there. So I guess I'm just trying to be a little bit of the voice of reason in the room, of be open to the possibilities. Definitely look to these unusual partnerships that the best partnerships I think are the ones that you look back and go, why didn't I think of that? Like the Teddy Grahams and the TED conference, which by the way, for just 1 second, I thought you were thinking about a partnership with Ted the movie, which would have been a much more bold, that would have been a much more bold statement on that. For anybody who knows that movie. So just be careful, I guess I would say. And as long as it's an active partnership that you're working together to move forward on something, that I think that's how it's going to work out the best.
Right. And finally, bringing up the political element of all of this, another shifting gears to political events. And, we're seeing a lot of brands now start to take a stand against President Trump in Washington. And one of the fallouts is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We've seen a long-time event hosts like Vanity Fair and New Yorker say, we're going to skip this year. But then you have hosts like Samantha Bee who are like, I'm going to have a competing event. And so meanwhile, you have an event, the actual White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's an actual thing, despite all the activations around it. And they're kind of caught in this position of, well, what do we do with our event? Where does this leave us, and who's going to be there? And it's fascinating to see brands try and sort through, do we do things as we've always done them, or do we bail, or do we change things up? And so we're going to see a lot of brands make that decision. And it's fascinating to watch, and coming up soon.
It is absolutely happening every single day. There is a brand that is disassociating with the Trump administration, or maybe in some cases are associating. I don't know too many who are in the world I live in, but it is definitely all of a sudden putting ethical dilemmas on people in the event industry. And we've actually had talks with people who are event organizers who may not take business, and the discussion is, if they're on the strategic side, is that more of a political statement than whether you're renting them chairs? So people are really rethinking how they do business. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I could talk about this for hours. I have dreams about writing a book called Activism Capitalism, because I feel like this is where we are right now, where we'll see our government make changes and usually start with affecting government agencies, and corporations will be what can protect people if they are in trouble. At the end of the day, a corporation, a private organization, can protect their human capital and their citizens. And so what we're seeing is, the flip side is incredible opportunity for corporations to be involved politically and to go back to partnerships to align. We see corporations taking steps into wanting to sponsor mission-based events because they can now. There used to be kind of this boundary between, we're going to get involved, maybe we shouldn't, let's stay out of it. But it's completely changed. For example, the NCAA has been putting pressure on North Carolina to eradicate HB2, which, if for those who don't know, that's the bathroom policy that you probably saw spark up about a year and a half ago. And they're not going to take any kind of NCAA championships into North Carolina until that's changed. Until
and you have the
NBA
that moved its All-Star game out of North Carolina to New Orleans. And so, there's definitely room for corporate brands to lead the way.
Exactly.
There's also fallout. Some people don't want they don't want Uber to be involved in some of these decisions. And,
what advice do you give to the CEO of these companies?
It's, if you're going to take you need to think it through. You can't just have an offhand tweet, or, what's your strategy? What do you believe in? And how are you going to get that message across? And Audrey, as you point out, events are a powerful way to do that, especially high profile events.
And if you do take a stand, will it have a political ramification on your events? A ramification on people attending and how they behave? And we were talking with our planners in Washington that they have to have much more security now in knowing who their attendees are at their events, because there is always a risk of protests that'll pop up out of nowhere. And so there are flip sides to many of these things. And it's definitely going to have an impact. I think from a crystal ball point of view, we don't know. It's impossible to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I don't think companies have a choice. That's the thing, is when we're talking about getting involved in politics, what big companies are getting involved in are actually just protecting people. Making sure that we have the rights that every person needs to fully participate in society. And unfortunately, that conversation is now political. Yeah. And so if you're the CEO of a company, you're reflecting your organizational culture externally. So you have to make those decisions.
Well, it does say that a CEO of a company is now, if culture is so important,
right,
they have to have a beat on their culture.
Right.
More than which way the wind is blowing. They could have an NRA culture that they will go that direction, or they can have an Uber culture that changes the way people think. So you really have to, the brands, the events, actually the DNA of the events actually have something to do with the DNA of the organization. And so any event organizer, I think one of the crystal ball things is really understanding the DNA of your organization to when you plan your events, however you plan them.
100%.
Brandt, any thoughts on that?
I think it's a powerful. By the way, I would buy that book, Audrey. So please write.
Yeah, go Audrey.
You know, it's funny. I was reading a history kind of the time leading up to the Revolutionary War, and almost all of the dissent leading up to the war itself was through through capital, through capitalism, so choosing what you buy and what you don't buy, and who you support financially and who you don't, was all they were doing, and all they could do. And so I really did like that DC Insider episode you guys recently had, because I think that is going to be kind of a microcosm of what we're going to see throughout the country, of increased security, potential for protest, companies being judged quickly and somewhat, I think, unfortunately harshly. I tend to be of the philosophy of be quick to support, but be slow to boycott, because you have to think through the ramifications. Like, nobody thought through, when we did delete Uber, that weekend, nobody thought through all of the Uber drivers then that don't make any money for the rest of the weekend. And so all of a sudden the people that you're supposedly trying to help, many of whom were immigrants, the people that you're supposedly trying to help are now being financially hurt. So we need to be quick to support companies that support our political views, but be a little bit slower to demand that people do things right away. And, we're going to boycott if you don't do exactly what we want the second that we want it. So I just urge a little, let me get on my soapbox for that 20 seconds and just say, let's be cautious, people, about what we do, and really think about the ramifications of if we don't take this business, or if we do help this company, if we don't provide chairs to that event, that kind of thing, or at the very least, let's try and be apolitical when we are. I thought that was a very good discussion in that recent episode.
So let's kind of close this down with one other topic of the next generation. We've sort of done a little crystal balling today. If you're listening to this, what should an aspiring event organizer study, learn about, get involved with to really make an impact in the future? Is it the technology side? Is it back to the basics of organization? Audrey, you are our resident sort of real planner here. What do you think? How do you, not that you're close, you're a new generation of planners. Mm-hmm. What are you suggesting to the people that are coming up behind you?
Pay attention to how our country is changing. By 2025, 65% of our workforce will be women and people of color. 65% of kids starting school today will work at jobs that don't exist right now. The way that the upcoming generation is coming into and supporting this country and the events that we need to put on need to adjust with how everything is going to shift and change. And we always talk about that. We always talk about 20 years from now, millennials are going to do this, that, and that. But it's true. And so, my forever soapbox is supporting diversity and inclusion in your events. And the way to do that and the way to think about it is you're reflecting what the future is going to be. If you want to be a 21st century grounded event planner, you need to bring in the minds that are going to be driving our economy in the future. So think about how you can change up the demographics, how you can change up the voices, how you can change up the way that we connect with each other, and kind of bridge divides that we've seen historically.
Do you think that this election was a watershed moment for event organizers so that they're not just thinking of the logistics, but thinking about the power they have in their hands?
I think so. I think it's more tangible than it's ever been. I think that we are being flooded with education on what it actually, the impact of immigrants in the United States. I think we're paying attention to refugees in a completely different way. I think that for an event planner, you're realizing that the speakers that you have at your event, the people that you bring in are your capital, they are who you are reflecting. So yeah,
and it's a privilege to engage those people.
Absolutely.
I mean, the time, the fact that you have their attention for a few minutes means you have to be responsible with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you have to be mindful in how you're doing it. So it's a time of intensive learning and listening, I would say, at large.
Brandt, any comments on that topic?
That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
Yeah, wasn't
it? I can't. So I guess I'll try and look at the practical side of and this is something we've talked about in the past is man, there's nothing better than practical experience. I mean, so get involved, volunteer, even on the smallest levels that you can find. So if you're not already actively working in the event space, volunteer, intern, just because you cannot beat practical experience and the lessons that you learn from seeing things implemented and seeing why people work certain ways and why did you make that choice and over that choice, why did you do the room set that way over that way. So don't be afraid to ask questions. There's so many people in this industry that are free with their time and their experience levels, and then get involved in any way you possibly can and then take advantage of all of the educational opportunities that are out there.
Great.
The one thing I'll add is know your sense of mission. That may be a hard thing when you're starting out, when maybe you've just learned about logistics, but it's the sense of mission, whether that is the information that you're trying to get across or the values of your organization. It's really diving into that and having that grounding, that firm understanding of what you're trying to accomplish through an event. I was at a gathering of event planners and they were talking about the importance of food, for instance. And for some people, they were like, I don't care what I'm serving at my event. People just need to get fed. But for other people, the food was important to getting across what they wanted to share about the values of that event and how the food can be emblematic of the future. Well, maybe that's a trivial example, but it matters to some people. It doesn't matter to others. And what it boils down to is, does it support what you're trying to get across? And every element of your event has to do that.
I would say my final closing comment was that we're in this era of the temporary marketplace and the temporary workplace. With the change of retail, everything is shifting. The idea of the honor it is to gather humans together and to create an experience for them is something that we're going to appreciate more and more. We're seeing it more and more, especially when luxury experiences are the new luxury. And luxury doesn't necessarily mean fancy, but it means the real substantive experience that you have emotionally. And so we have more responsibility than ever. So I think an event organizer has to be as grounded in all different topics. They have to read the newspaper, whatever's left of the newspaper, in the symbolic way, watch the blogs and things like that, and really understand what's happening in the world and understand the human condition. And I believe that all the things we're talking about, we integrate so well into everything else that's going on in the world that it is such a powerful position to be responsible for organizing human beings. With that, I love this conversation, and I would love to continue doing this on a regular basis. This is like feeds the soul, this kind of stuff. And so I look forward to doing this more and more with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. If you are looking for a state-of-the-art learning management system, take a look at Digitel's newest platform, Opus DX. Opus DX offers the robust platform for event organizers and associations to manage content. To learn more and schedule a demo, email them at contactus@digitelinc.com. That's contact us at digitellinc.com.